All right, welcome back to Bayou Time, everyone. We have the Majority Leader, Steve Scalise, Louisiana's 1st Congressional District. And Congressman, good to see you again. I know you're just coming off a fun time in Mardi Gras in Washington, but a lot of business to talk about. First of all, how are you today, sir?
Martin, I'm doing great. It's great to be back with you, and very busy up here in a good way. It was great seeing thousands of Louisiana friends come up to Washington for Washington Mardi Gras. We're back at work and moving a really aggressive conservative agenda up here in this new Republican majority House.
Yeah, let's talk about that because, of course, we all followed it and seen the long time it took to get the leader, but that's all done. It's all behind. What is the mood of the Congress now? How do you feel it's going, and how do you feel it's allowing y'all to move that agenda? Is it easier process than you thought, or is it still very difficult?
It's a more open process, and what I see is a much more focused conference, especially on the Republican side. Now that we're in the majority, there were a lot of things that we wanted to do the last few years to get our country back on track. And, you and I have talked about energy policy and how bad energy policy has hurt the country, but it's surely hurt South Louisiana. You've seen that with an open border, the problems that an open border creates. In South Louisiana, we're losing hundreds of people a month to deaths from drugs like fentanyl. When I talk to coroners in my district, they're seeing deaths going through the roof from people that die. They think they're taking a Xanax or a Skittles, and it's laced with fentanyl, and they don't even wake up. And this shouldn't be happening. So we've been wanting to address all of these problems for a long time, and now that we're in the majority, we can bring bills to the floor to do it. And in fact, we made real changes to the rules of the House to allow members to be more engaged. We got rid of proxy voting. Look, you had almost half of the members of Congress on some of the major bills last year under Speaker Pelosi. More than half the members of Congress weren't even showing up in Washington to vote on those bills. They were allowed to have another person vote for them. That had never happened before in the history of our country. We got rid of that. That's ridiculous. You got to show up and do your job. You can't tell somebody who's working on an oil rig, hey, phone it in or go on a Zoom call or something. You've got to show up and do your work. So should Congress, and so we've done that. And I think it's made it a better process, because when people are there in person, when we're looking at each other in the eye, when we're starting to address these problems, it's a lot better when you're right there talking to the other person that you're trying to work through things with.
And plus, it holds them accountable. It's easy to go behind a computer or push a button or however y'all do it, but when you're there, they got to own up to their vote.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about insurance, and I know there's been a lot of talk, especially after Ida in our district, and I know you've seen all the damage, but people are really struggling to pay that mortgage, and of course a lot of them who can't self-insure have to pay the insurance because the banks have that clause in the contract, so they have to have it, there's no doubt. But what is being done, and what's the conversations to maybe help these people out? I know you've probably been getting a lot of comments on these type of topics. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I go through different parts of South Louisiana, my district, that are still recovering from Ida's damage. And, it's more than a year after the storm hit, and yet folks are still struggling. And so we were able to get a lot of federal money coming down to South Louisiana to help people rebuild, but it's a slow process. But now you're also seeing this insurance crisis, and the state's dealing with this on the homeowners insurance. You're seeing companies that went under, companies that are not writing new policies, that are jacking up rates. And so the state's going to use some surplus money to put an incentive fund in place to hopefully lower premiums in Louisiana. But at the federal level, I've been working with a number of other members on this major problem we're seeing from the National Flood Insurance Program. NFIP, as it's known, came out with this ridiculous thing called Risk Rating 2.0. And when it came out, we were starting to hear complaints immediately from people who were in some of the areas where rates already started going through the roof. And so I started meeting with flood protection district heads, people who build levees for a living, engineers, hydrologists who understand what ratings are supposed to be for flood, and they couldn't make any sense out of what FEMA was doing. So I asked FEMA for a meeting. And this is over a year ago. They refused to meet to explain what they were doing. That's unacceptable, Martin. And so I told them, look, if we get the majority, we're going to have hearings, and it's not going to be a pleasant experience for you if you're doing things bureaucratically that are hurting people, not just in South Louisiana. This is hurting people all across the country. And if you think as a federal employee, you don't have to explain what you're doing to other people that you're having an impact on, you got another thing coming. And so that's going to happen. We're working on that right now. Nobody's been able to explain it. The folks, again, that build levees in my district and others say this makes absolutely no sense. And FEMA even used inaccurate data to come up with all these high premiums. That needs to change.
Let me ask you, because you brought up a good point. I watch all the hearings on YouTube, and I watch you, and I watch Senator Kennedy, and I watch just a bunch of them. And it just seems to me that there's this arrogance in Washington that anybody that comes up and has to appear before a committee, that it's almost a dog and pony show that they present, and y'all are pressing and pressing and pressing, and somewhere along the way it changed where people felt like, well, I don't have to answer to anybody. What can y'all try to do with, I guess, regulations or any type of changes in the way these committees are done that really forces their hand to answer the questions and move the process forward?
Yeah, and you're exactly right with the arrogance, when people get drunk with power. Unfortunately, power affects people differently. And these unelected bureaucrats, I think, have gotten so arrogant in some cases where they don't think they're accountable to anybody. And unfortunately, Congress for the last few years has not held anybody accountable. And so one of the things we did day one is said, we're putting committees in place and putting members on those committees who are going to hold people accountable. So you're an unelected bureaucrat, whether it's a cabinet secretary on down. If we've got a border crisis, Secretary Mayorkas is going to come in and he's going to have really tough questions he's going to have to answer. We're going to be looking into things like, where did COVID start? For whatever reason, Speaker Pelosi wouldn't even hold those hearings. Dr. Fauci, others need to come in and answer questions like, not only did it start in the lab in Wuhan, but were American taxpayer dollars going to companies like EcoHealth Alliance, using gain-of-function research to create this weaponized disease known as COVID in the lab, not some bat biting a cat, and other crazy things we heard. And so holding people accountable and making it very clear up front that if you're working for the taxpayers of the United States of America and they're paying your salaries, you have a responsibility to do that job fairly. And if you're not, we're going to bring you in, we're going to hold you accountable. But we also need to pass legislation. There's a bill I love called the REINS Act. And as majority leader, I get to determine which bills come to the floor. You can bet that's going to be a bill that comes to the floor in the first few months. But the REINS Act says if a federal bureaucracy, an agent, an unelected bureaucrat in Washington comes up with some idea, a rule or a regulation, and it has an impact on the economy, which almost all of them do, shouldn't that rule or regulation first go through Congress? Those of us that are held accountable every 2 years go before the voters, like every other one of my colleagues does, every 2 years. And if people don't like the way I've been voting, they can actually hold me accountable and send me back home or reelect me if they like the job I'm doing. These bureaucrats that, frankly, weigh a lot more power than a lot of members of Congress are making decisions, rules and regulations that are harming people. And they put the rule in place, and the only way I can stop it is if I pass a law that President Biden signs to reverse it. Why should an unelected bureaucrat have that much power? If it's a great idea, bring it to us and we'll approve it. If it's a really bad idea, we would reject it. But why should you be able to bring forward a bad idea like risk rating 2.0? That hurts millions of people in America. Nobody ever voted on it. Some unelected bureaucrat you can't even find is the one creating it. And then it becomes law. It, in essence, becomes law. That's wrong. The REINS Act would reverse that process.
Got about 5 minutes left, and I want to keep to my work because I know you're very busy. But every time I turn the TV on, there's new documents, secret documents, top secret, being found in the garage, in some other building. And I'm not saying it's just Democrats. They found some with former President Trump, but it seems like we're finding a lot of this. And Where do you see all this going? Because it's quite alarming to a lot of people watching that. It seems like everybody has secret documents hidden in a file folder somewhere.
Right. And this is something that, to me, the thing that angers me the most is the double standard. Because you saw last year, the FBI raided President Trump's home. That had never happened before in the history of our country, where the FBI raided the home of a former president. And by the way, presidents have taken classified documents. We can debate whether or not they should be able to, but presidents, Barack Obama took, from what I've heard, millions of classified documents. I don't know the real number because they don't publish that, but no one disputes that he took large numbers of classified documents. And there's a negotiation, there's a process so that the National Archives can be assured that those documents will be kept secure. In President Trump's case, they asked him to keep it behind lock and key in one of the rooms in his house. And then the FBI kicked down that door. They broke that lock. With Joe Biden's case, first of all, go back and remember, before we all knew about these documents, Joe Biden knew about it. He went on national TV on 60 Minutes and said it was irresponsible for President Trump to have those documents. He knew when he was saying that he himself had documents. As vice president, you're not allowed to declassify documents that are classified. A president of the United States can actually do that, can declassify those documents. So there's a big difference here. But what really gets me the most irritated is that the press and the Justice Department treated these two cases very differently. The Justice Department knew that Biden had those documents prior to the election, and they sat on it. They concealed it until after the election. They surely didn't go kick any doors down. They actually waited for Joe Biden to turn over what he said were all the documents. Turns out he didn't turn them all over, and now they're finding more. Why did they treat Joe Biden differently than President Trump or any other president? It begs those questions. And also, there's a larger question. Are they classifying too many things that really shouldn't be classified?
That's a good point. As I'm watching national news and as a local reporter, but more as a citizen, I'm just alarmed at the amount, and I'm going to call it shenanigans, that Hunter Biden was involved in, that the president, we're finding out, had to have some knowledge as the quote alleged big man or big guy or whatever. But how much diving into those issues are y'all at right now, and what can we expect to see in the upcoming weeks on that?
Yeah, the Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee are all looking into this. And frankly, the more they ask questions, it's alarming how many more disturbing things we find out about, not just what Hunter Biden was doing, but how Hunter Biden was tied in financially to Joe Biden, the big guy, as he was referred to in some of those emails that were discovered on Hunter Biden's laptop, where it looked like Hunter Biden was doing a lot of dealings with foreign countries like Russia, like China, that we should be very alarmed about. And again, those classified documents were also accessible to Hunter Biden. He's getting these large multi-million-dollar contracts with countries like China and Russia, and there are allegations that some of that money ended up going to Joe Biden. They've disputed that in the past. There are documents that make it appear that he actually did get that money. That is being investigated right now as well.
The final question, because I know that you've worked closely and you have the tremendous groundbreaking that y'all appeared at last time in Terrebonne Parish. It just seems like more and more the Corps of Engineers and the federal government is on board. It was a good message that y'all brought from Washington last time. Is that still on point for the people watching? It seems like the new colonel is really working good with the local leaders. Is that still on point?
It is, and sometimes it's been adversarial, but I met with the Corps of Engineers leadership a long time ago for big projects like LA1, which I've been able to get the funding to complete. The locals, of course, started this. This all started with Terrebonne Lafourche Parish, putting up money for big flood protection projects like Morganza to the Gulf, which you were referring to. You're talking about LA1, where locals put up the money initially, the state came in, but ultimately it wasn't going to be completed until the federal government bought into it. So I fought and went to bat to get that federal money. Secretary Elaine Chao, under President Trump, was the one who approved what was at the time the largest Tiger grant in the country, infra grant, I believe it was, to complete LA1. Then we went to work on Morganza to the Gulf. And for years, the Corps of Engineers was saying this project just doesn't meet our criteria to fund it. And yet the locals were building a lot of those levees themselves to high standards. And we were looking at the cost estimates that the Corps was doing, and they just didn't seem to make sense. So we ultimately got the Corps to go reevaluate this project. I was able to get the Office of Management Budget in the White House to reevaluate it. And they realized that they had overpriced the project dramatically. They were saying it was going to cost $10 billion. Ended up, it's probably a $3 billion project, which is still a lot of money. But when you talk about the justification for the federal government to get involved, it actually allowed the federal government to say, okay, you know what, we'll start participating in it. And then I was able to go get some initial seed money for the federal government to start it. We just a few weeks ago had the groundbreaking for that first federal project. Again, the locals had been putting up money for years. The first time ever that we got federal money was just in these last few months. And we had that groundbreaking with all the local officials and the Corps of Engineers. And I think it was an important step to get Morganza to the Gulf closer to finalization. A lot of those projects have been built locally. To get the Corps of Engineers to help complete it has been critical, and now we have them as a partner in this process.
Before you leave, are you happy with the way LSU's looking at their players? I know I got to get an LSU question in.
Hey, look, it excites me every time, Coach Kelly came in, turned the program around, had him in the mix in the last few weeks, even for the national title race. But he's doing great on recruiting, too. It's great to see LSU football back in play. And, and I think we're going to be another top 10 team again next year competing. I was at the Alabama game where we beat Alabama in overtime.
Wow.
It's been a long time. Maybe the national title game back in 2020 was more exciting, but that was really exciting.
All right, there you have
Tigers.
It. From the Majority Leader, Steve Scalise, Congressman Scalise, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in person next time you're in the area.
Same here. God bless. Take care.
All right, there you have it, folks. On Bayou Time, we'll take a short break. We'll have a lot more. Don't go away.